Let's pick up our discussion then around Valentine's Day and what it takes to, I suppose, be involved in love as they speak. Our guest, once again, is Anele Siswana, clinical psychologist and a relationship expert. Anele, before we went for that quick break, apologies, you were still explaining to us this notion that even though we're made for community, some people believe they simply don't have time for love.
Yeah, one, we have time for romantic or intimate interactions or connections, because there's something really important about human connection at the level of couples. That's why we thrive for this exclusivity, to have this one particular person who sees you in totality. So we may not have enough time, but we thrive in the connection that then comes with this exclusivity. And I suppose what today is about, it gives us the idea of celebrating this so beautiful experience between two people who just want to love each other.
Why does it feel, though, that in today's day and age, and maybe I'm just disillusioned because I'm a relatively young person in this age, but it feels like that exclusivity, that compatibility has become so elusive?
It depends. I mean, the nature of our relationships now, if you look at how things have evolved, chances are they begin on the DM. I mean, it could be an Instagram DM, could be anything that is more technological. So obviously the level of connection is not as palatable as it would be when people meet in everyday, day-to-day kind of spaces. So over time, things have evolved and the way we think about intimacy and romance has changed. So we are likely to see representations of love and romance and intimacy changing with time because of the influences that then happen as a result of that.
Yeah, you speak of influences. Today, of course, in a heteronormative setting, we see that, you know, you can have two people who are very career driven, for example. This notion of there being a nurturer at home who's going to take care of the household, raise the kids while the man goes for the hunt, so to speak, has in some instances been completely shattered. What's given your own experience with the people you interact with? What sense are you getting about how we're managing that, how we're negotiating that change?
Yeah, I mean, you highlighted a key thing in a heteronormative kind of context where it's a man and a woman. And I think we need to somewhat demystify ideas of thinking that this level of love or romance or intimacy is exclusive to that. Even with couples of the same sex, they may experience a particular kind of nuances that are the same across the board. And with this idea, it just comes back to communication, that if we communicate what you are comfortable to do, whatever it could be, roles, could be domestics, could be anything. It makes the idea of love and being together much more easier. And obviously in a heteronormative or heterosexual context, rules are clearly defined. A woman would do this and a man would do this. But gone are the days where one responsibility falls on the other person. We have to find a way of meeting each other halfway so that we create a room that at the end of the day we still a couple. We may be parents, we may be married, but at the same time, there are things that when the day ends, it still leaves us together in the sense where we need to be romantic, we need to be in love. So with that idea, it's gone are the days where we just focus on the roles and forget about the softer things that keep the relationship going.
That's so interesting. Speaking of those softer things, came across a recent podcast with Oprah Winfrey, she needs no introduction, speaking about the inner child. Look, it was in a completely different context, but I can't help but think about how much of how people express love comes down to whether or not they've tended to the needs of this inner child.
Obviously, any relationship has potential to bring aspects of our unmet needs. And for some reason, we hope and imagine that this partner, this person that you have a relationship with, would somewhat meet those unmet needs. Whereas in a psychological context, no romantic partner has capacity to tap into those unmet psychological needs. What this basically means, I can only be your lover and not go as far as being your therapist. But obviously, every romantic relationship has needs, and those needs would be either romance, would be intimacy, would be sexual, would be anything that any relationship would typically have. Where it demands things that are more psychological, this is where it is important for couples to have a couples therapist to unpack all of those deep-seated psychological things which the other partner may not necessarily be able to meet, not even able to identify for that matter. Because if I'm your romantic partner, the only thing I can do is just to provide things that a relationship requires, but therapeutic elements of healing an inner child, that's a very difficult thing.
It is, and you know, I've come across many people who are completely dismissive of this entire notion, you know, not that I've been around, but you know, I've been in scenarios where individuals don't even unlock an awareness of that kind of, let's call it, facet of their being. And I wonder how you reckon, what's the best way to approach scenarios like that? You know, because you're right. I think if you are in a relationship, you don't want to become a therapist. You want to become a partner, which is a bit different.
Yeah, I mean, that would then mean, I mean, relationships differ, and there are different levels of where the relationship is. Obviously, a new romantic relationship that we're on a honeymoon phase, we don't have the time and the capacity to go there, right? It's nice, it's lovely, but when the relationship has matured and found its rhythm and found its safety in the relationship, now what would then mean we are comfortable to be vulnerable with each other. I can only be able to go to those spaces as much as I know you're not my therapist, but I can go that deeper because I have an understanding of the holding space of the relationship, and that you'll be able to hold my vulnerability. Now imagine if I tell you my deep things by my inner child, unmet inner childhood things that may even be very difficult for the other person. So potentially I may not be able to disclose that because I'm scared that the relationship may not continue. So the state and the stage of where the relationship is demands what needs to be discussed at that time. But for the most part, relationships need vulnerability and safety to contain that vulnerability. Where that is missing, it's very difficult to open ourselves to deeper conversations.
Fair enough. We cannot not speak about conflict. Today I know is about, you know, the flowers and the gifts and all those things, but I can imagine a scenario where many couples are entering this Valentine's Day on shaky ground, quite frankly. How do we ensure that, well, firstly, what's the best way to approach conflict, number one? But number two, how do you ensure that conflicts aren't terminal, right? Where you get to a point where a disagreement is seen as you know, something that ultimately leads to the end of a relationship.
In the context of romantic relationships,
yes,
conflict often result as a kind of product of lack of communication or misunderstandings. Then we typically have conflicts, and it differs from one relationship to the other. But where a couple struggles with communication styles, that I'm probably an argumentative communicator and the other one is an emotive communicator, obviously we're going to clash, right? So for the most part, couples really struggle to understand their communication style. And in the context of conflict, it could be that what you want does not relate to what I want, and then we miss each other there. So conflicts that you are likely to find today is, babe, but I like this, and the other one says, but I believe, and the other one would say, I believe in Valentine's, and the other one says not, right? And because we're not on the same level of understanding about what this day is about and what potentially I expect from this day that could lead to conflict. But for the most part, I always say to couples, go to a therapist that will help you uncover and get to understand how come sometimes couples have this one dominant issue that keeps coming. That becomes the root cause of the conflict. If you are unable to resolve that as a couple, then it means you need to see a therapist, someone who will be able to help you read processes. I mean, as therapists and as relationship experts, we look at two things. We look at communication from a content level, what people talk about in their everyday, day-to-day, morning or whatever that they talk about, and look at process as to how we impact each other emotionally. And for the most part, we rely on kind of stick more to conflict at content level, not understanding the psychological process that happens as a result of that.
Sure. Very briefly, I'm told we're out of time. There's a notion out there that love is dead. And I don't know to what extent you agree with that. What does your work and experience tell you?
Love will never die. It's a human experience. It's just that we meet people who potentially do not have the capacity of loving us the way we want to be loved. And once you are loved the way you want to be loved, why would love die?
And on that note, we'll have to leave it. Anele Siswana, thanks very much indeed for popping by.